Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. I'm Toni Marcolini. Today, I'm attacking a slightly more serious topic, and it's alcoholism. Uh, I have a panel with me, which is unusual too. If you watch or listen to the podcast, usually I'm just with one person, but today I have three esteemed colleagues with me. Attorney Jim Durek, retired Judge Bradley Ferencz,
Good morning.
and yes, who's also going to be acting as somewhat of a co-host with me today, which I'm thrilled to have. And also Dana Vasers, who works in public health, and making policy and the like. So I want to start, I think, if we can today, with Jim, your story, right? Because you're an attorney, you were an attorney for many years, and then developed alcoholism later in life.
That's
So
right.
why don't you tell us your journey?
Um, yeah, as you said, Tony, I'm retired. My journey was basically I got very addicted to alcohol later in life. And I heard people say frequently that alcohol can really get its hooks in you. And it did. Um, from a bottle of scotch a day, added bottle of wine, then two bottles of wine, shakes, taking a drink at 8 in the morning. I have to honestly say that the path to sobriety is not always straight. It wasn't for me. It's a zigzag. Sorry, I'm getting all these spam calls. Um, but it was really, really, truly one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And I'm just so thankful that I found a place. Um, for me, it's Smart Recovery. There's a lot of other recovery groups, but SMART stands for self-management and recovery training. And its whole thing is about empowerment, not that like we're powerless over alcohol. It's empowerment. And, I started as an attendee at the meetings, became a host, and now I'm a facilitator. And I have to tell you, I love it. The support and it just means so much. And it
Now,
helps me stay on the straight and narrow.
yeah, I mean, I have to say, and I've known you a lot of years, right? I wouldn't have picked up on it, certainly in being around you at the courthouse or, um, now, you said it to kind of develop later in life, but was it the stress of your career? Was there a specific trigger for you or just, um, something that came about naturally?
I don't know if it was naturally. I mean, there's always talk about genetics and environment. And uh, on my mother's side, particularly, practically all my uncles were alcoholic. And if, it runs in the family, you're going to be born into the environment. But my wife is working full time and very hard. I became an empty nester. That kind of got it rolling. And then when I retired, that was it. That was it.
So,
I
uh,
Jim, really started drinking very, very heavily. are you indicating that it became more difficult to maintain sobriety when you retired because there was nothing to do, so to speak? You were just, I guess, at home. You know Nobody what, to do. Brad, you hit the nail on the head. Nothing to do, boredom, not working, and it was like, what the fuck do I do now? I know, I'll drink. Could never get through a movie. Uh, I have three grandkids, and I would have screwed up my relationship with them, and it's so meaningful. So, in a lot of ways, I feel blessed that things kind of rolled along my way.
sure.
Good
And I
question.
mean,
Thank you, Brad.
in
You know
your,
what?
in, go ahead.
One of the things that I find in the profession, and Dana, as I know you have a law degree, though you don't practice right now, and Tony, answer to you in the profession,
going out, socializing, alcohol is very much, not just present, but encouraged. The amount of times you go visit a friend, you go to a bar function, you sit down and somebody says, what will you have to drink?
Yeah,
And you say, I'd like an unsweetened iced tea. They look at you like, would you like anything else? When you sit down in every restaurant, especially, any, I don't want to say decent, but any restaurant that serves dinner, there's a wine list. There's an alcohol list with different kinds of drinks. And I think it's encouraged to the point where you're almost a social outcast if you don't drink. And the idea, Jim, that you need support and people around you, your weekly meetings and talking to other people who are similarly situated, I think that's a very real response to the world around us as professionals, when it comes to simply saying, I'd rather just have my own sweetened iced tea. Thank you.
sure. And you know what? That's a perfect way to handle it, Brad. But especially early on in sobriety, um, Smart has some tools. Is one of them to have an escape plan. I mean, typically if it's crowded, uh, you guys know about political events. The alcohol flows like crazy there. And, make sure you run around, see everybody. 98% of politics is just showing up. And then you go, excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom, and psh, that's your escape plan. Get out. Whatever you need to do, get out. And I started drinking half a cranberry, half seltzer with a wedge of lime. And nobody knows. Nobody knows what I'm drinking. Sometimes it's just nice to walk around with something in your hand. And now I've been almost 5 years sober. My wife likes wine. She can drink wine. I don't care. Um, she can have wine here at home. I don't care. The other thing is they've come out with some pretty good 0-0 alcohol beers. Guinness Draft 0-0, Stella
Zero, zero,
Artois.
zero, zero, meaning there's no alcohol.
No, well, that's a little tricky. It says 0-0, but it's less than 0.5. And I think you can probably get that out of grape juice. So it really doesn't affect me. And I don't know. Any other questions? Tony, Brad, Dana?
Well, actually, I wanted to talk a little bit to Dana about the kind of work you're doing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I work in alcohol policy. And aside from, alcohol use disorders, we see a whole host of harms from alcohol use in general. Um, some of which, include like physical, sexual, psychological violence. We see property crimes. We see harms to fetuses with pregnant mothers drinking, financial harms, just DUIs, car crashes, child neglect, maltreatment, just a whole host of harms uh, from alcohol, aside from the alcohol use disorders. And these are costly. And when we talk about harm reduction, we don't focus on sobriety necessarily, just ways to mitigate these harms that are being caused. So ways to reduce alcohol harms, they really stem from like limiting physical availability of alcohol through, you know, distance limitations between schools and liquor stores, zoning, licensing, things like that, restricting and reducing alcohol advertising and marketing. A lot of alcohol advertising is targeted at LGBTQ plus and people of color. And then we also see, or in terms of harm reduction, increasing the price of alcohol. And this is primarily done through alcohol taxes, alcohol excise taxes primarily, which are charged in Massachusetts, at least, to the wholesalers and the importers of alcohol, which then trickles down to the consumers. So
Is that to make it harder for young people to purchase?
So it has that trickle down effect to young people, essentially. But just in general, if you can raise more money with alcohol taxes, maybe we can put that money back into harm reduction. Maybe it goes towards domestic violence prevention, different sorts of funds that the state can administer.
Sure. Okay. Now, I mean, it was interesting that you were talking about all the different harms, which I guess we don't really think about.
Right.
Right. I mean, you think about what saving the person, but you don't think about the repercussions to those other areas.
Yeah.
So your focus is trying to come up with solutions that will help prevent not just alcoholism to the person, but rather to these other harms.
Right. So population level policies that will really try to alter, kind of curb the behavior of the population, not the individual.
Do you know any statistics, Dana, in terms of adolescent alcoholism?
I
If she doesn't, I'll bet you she can get them.
I bet you she can too.
have, 15% of youth start drinking before the age of 13,
Oh, God.
Wow.
which is really high.
Oh,
There are studies that are administered, the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Study. Don't quote me on the name of that. It's YRBS, but I'm not positive on the acronym. It's a CDC-backed study that gets administered in, I believe, middle school and high schools. And that asks a whole host of questions around substance use and alcohol use. So that's a great tool to look at in terms of what these statistics are, what students are reporting, what they're seeing.
You talk about what students see and what's being reported, and I am reminded that when young people and folks graduate from college, when they graduate from high school, what do? They have a party.
yeah.
How is that party, in fact, I'll use the word fueled? It's fueled by alcohol.
Yeah.
It's fueled by who can chug the most beers. In a fraternity, and I was a member of a fraternity back years ago. Part of the pledge period was, how much can you drink before you pass out? And the repercussions can be absolutely awful.
Yeah.
A specific case, Dana, that I recall, that I had to preside over as a sitting judge in the criminal part, the vehicular homicide, dealt with a young man that had just got his master's degree. And he and his girlfriend and his best friend, brother, and their girlfriend went out to celebrate his getting his master's. Agreement was the girlfriend would drive. She got drunk. He was drunk. She said, I can't, drive. He said, you know what? I'll drive. One car, he drove into a telephone pole.
Oh,
Beautiful kid, beautiful, start to life, into the telephone pole, killed his girlfriend, killed his best friend. Nobody.
And he survived.
ever-
He survived.
He survived, minimal damage. And I will never forget the prosecutors asking me for consecutive sentences because two people passed away. And the mother of the decedent young man came in and said to me, please don't send to jail my only remaining son, because they were that close. What more can you do to a kid? And I had to send him to jail. It's mandatory.
right.
What more damage can be done before people shake their heads and say, maybe we shouldn't be, not only say rewarding, but encouraging, using it as a rite of passage, using it and supporting it as something that we do when we want to celebrate. Maybe it's time to start celebrating in some other way. But that's not what we advertise. That's not who we are. That's not what the alcohol industry, God bless them, will let us believe. We've taken it off television. There's no more advertisements like took cigarettes off of, in Europe, you've got warnings on the labels, every cigarette, this cigarette will kill you. What do we have in the United States? The lobbying is tremendous. Dana, have you run across lobbying efforts by alcohol companies that, I don't want to say interfere with, to make it more difficult to control adolescent drinking?
So I haven't personally worked with any lobbyists or against.
You will be.
But right now we do see a lot of these high risk products that are attractive to youth.
Good point.
So like the spiked Sunny D, bubblegum flavored vodka, things of that nature,
Yeah.
that's attractive to younger kids.
Bubblegum vodka.
Whipped cream vodka, that was popular when I was in high school. That was all the craze.
Wait a minute, Dana, what were you drinking when I wasn't around, in high school?
I wasn't drinking any of it, but that we see these high risk products, that alcohol infused ice cream, just things that are attractive to youth. But I just want to touch on two things you said. One of them being DUIs, which I think the general public pretty much recognizes and is in support of DUI legislation, policies. It's a pretty, it gets a lot of attention, rightfully so. We want to keep people off the streets that have had a drink. But the other harms associated with alcohol and those other negative repercussions, not that they're overlooked in society, but there's not an emphasis on look at what the alcohol has contributed to in this behavior.
Can I chime in right now? And I think a lot of this may relate to what you're talking about, Dana. Kids drinking as young as 13 years of age. Brad, what you were saying about all the chug contests and stuff like that. And, people have a tendency to think of alcoholism and the liver. A friend of mine told me it's a fire in your body. Heart, pancreas, brain cells degenerate. If you quit in time, they can regenerate. I also got early liver disease, which scared the daylights out of me. Fear can be a great motivator sometimes.
And cancer. Let me just interrupt and
Oh,
say,
yes,
there's lots
yes.
of cancers that are triggered
Yeah.
by alcohol.
No question.
Yeah.
4% of all cancers worldwide in 2020 were attributed to alcohol.
Oh,
And there's
hold on, Dana. What was that number?
4% of all cases
Really?
worldwide, all cancer cases worldwide in 2020, which was
Yeah.
around 750,000 cases, were attributable to alcohol consumption. But there's also a higher prevalence in Black Americans compared to white individuals of cancer attributable to alcohol consumption, despite on average white counterparts drinking more than Black.
May I chime in again, Toni? I know you're going to ask a question, but we were speaking about DWIs. I got one, and it wasn't pretty. I went to a Verizon store locally. Every day it would open at 10. Thank God on Sundays it opened at 11. So me and my intoxicated state of mind, I figure I'd wait. So I went to Taco Bell, and I'm sitting there eating Taco Bells, and then I pull up in front of the store, and my foot slipped off, brake, hit the gas, boom. I had the presence of mind to throw it in to park. Didn't help. I crashed through the window. Brad, and based upon what you just said, I thank God every day that there was not a human being in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of property damage. I still can't get insurance, but I thank God every day. Every day.
Jimmy, what time of day was that?
Oh, it was a beautiful thing. I went out at 10 in the morning. I was at an event the night before trying to quit, and I was doing good. I got home. I figured I'd celebrate. I started celebrating about 11 in the morning, maybe quit around 8.
And think about the concept in your head. I did great last night. I went someplace where people functioning, everybody, and I didn't. God,
Yeah.
I'm entitled to a drink now. I was so good last night.
Yeah. We
And
do cost benefit analysis a lot in smart recovery, and it's like, short-term benefit, long-term consequence. And I just thought I'd share that because, a number of you have touched upon things that resonate with me, and I think I can talk about. So thanks.
I'll tell you what else, that if they ever took and put a sobriety test for every lawyer walking out of a county bar meeting and every judge walking out of a county bar meeting. I see that you're in agreement, Jim, without even saying a word. I have a suspicion there would be a lot of folks who would be looking for attorneys for the municipal court appearances for DUI.
Yeah.
And it leads me sometimes to question why they have open bars. When we have county bar meetings, and I was a county bar president at one point. I was worked with a state bar. I've worked with various Supreme Court judicial committees, and I will tell you, it is more usual than not to have an open bar. And I would say, why? Are we? And I'll also say, by the way, in my own, not in defense, that's for sure, but my own position, there are times I will tell you I've been on the road when I shouldn't have been on the road, and there, but for fortune, Jim, go I. And anybody that doesn't know that or thinks it's never happened to them, my guess is, you know what, you're not being honest with yourself.
Well, I think we have two competing topics here almost developing, right? There's the concept of alcoholism, where somebody has a problem, it's truly a health crisis like any other in that regard, right? An addiction is a serious thing to be treated, and certainly serious to the person, hard to break, hard to fix their life as it's decaying somewhat around them. But there's the health issue of alcoholism for the person. But we're also talking about people who maybe aren't alcoholics, like I suspect the master's student judge who's out celebrating, or just the availability of alcohol to people who are engaging, maybe who don't necessarily have a problem, but it's available, it's there, it's maybe being encouraged, or they're being marketed to begin. So I think there's two competing topics that we're somewhat having here. One, the people who have a problem, where does it come from? Is it stress? Is it unhappiness? Is it loneliness? And getting those people help, and the ramifications, for what can happen with somebody who has such a problem. And then you have this other competing problem. What are we doing as a society, right, to prevent or to stop marketing to and encouraging alcohol in every crevice of our lives?
Right.
And I think those are two really competing topics that we're delving
I
in.
think the phrase "every crevice of our lives" is an accurate, insight as to the way the alcohol industry has really insidiously, got into our lives. I don't think we can go a day without seeing some advertisement or a liquor store or some indication that there's alcohol available or encouraged. And while I really hadn't given it much thought, the more I think about it, the more inclined I am to say to our county bar at the next meeting, let's stop giving away alcohol. It's part of our county bar dinner. If somebody wants to drink, God bless. I think they should be entitled to it. But why are we saying to our lawyers, who are under enough stress and who probably look to ways to alleviate that stress in a multitude of ways, and one of them is, as Jimmy pointed out, drinking. Why are we encouraging it? If you're going to if you want to buy a drink, but why are we giving it to you? I'm reminded of doing a case where the lawyer showed up with a driver because he'd lost his license and he was drunk in court.
Yeah.
I couldn't let him represent somebody. What do I do as a sitting judge with that lawyer? I said to him, I'm not going to hear you. I'll talk to you after lunch. It's at 10 in the morning. He came back after lunch at 1:30. He was drunker. He was obviously already under a DUI because he had a driver there. I ended up talking to the driver. Yet we as an entity, as a bar association, really don't do anything to try and control. We have lawyer assistance programs, by the way, that work with people who are willing to call up the state bar assistance program, but we really don't do anything to say we're not going to encourage alcohol.
You're absolutely right, Brad. I mean, in the advertising, everywhere you look, It's still on television. It's still in magazines. And it's just like present everywhere. And for a bit of an analogy, in New Jersey, marijuana is now legal, but it's not advertised like alcohol. You don't see it in magazines. You don't see it, on TV.
It's probably taxed higher too.
Pardon?
It's
It's
probably
tax time.
taxed higher as well.
Well, hopefully, whatever money is taxed go to good uses like you were mentioning, Dana, because we certainly need it, especially with our youth.
Hey, Dana, during your research, were you able to tie in any analysis or get any understanding of what happens with the money that's taxed on alcohol?
So it's usually, it'll be legislatively mandated what will happen with those tax dollars. It'll be earmarked. And again, it depends on the state and how they want to allocate the funds, but it can, I mean, theoretically, it could probably go back into the state's general fund all the way to something super specialized like addiction treatment and rehabilitation.
But it's not mandated from what you can
It
tell.
is.
It is
It,
mandated.
it will be based on the statute, at least in Massachusetts. That's how they do it. The
And
statute
but
explicitly lays out.
folks should know you live in,
I'm in Boston.
yeah, so you're more familiar with that. I don't think in New Jersey, Jim, Tony, and that it's mandated that the taxes on alcohol go to rehabilitation, go to fund alcohol education. I don't think that's the case in New
I
Jersey.
don't think, Brad, I don't think so either.
I'll
I don't
tell
think
you.
it's it. Oh, we have a research maven.
And Dana, you live in Massachusetts, and I remember living in New Hampshire for 3 years, no tax on booze.
So, yeah,
And
they had something
people would come
interesting.
over in droves.
Yeah.
And then on the way back, the Massachusetts State Police would be waiting there for them.
Well, even today,
It's
Massachusetts
true.
hasn't raised their alcohol excise taxes in decades. It's lost 72% of its value since the last raise, which I believe was 1980.
Okay. How about
Um,
your automobile excise tax?
yeah, I pay that every year. I had to pay it twice this year because I moved last year, so they double charge you.
I wonder though, what can we do actively to prevent the marketing to the youth? I mean, what can we do to truly prevent? Because it is glorified, right? I mean, all of us,
Oh my
and it
God.
doesn't matter your age range.
Oh my
I
God.
mean, we can range from somebody from being in their teens to being in their 80s now. But everyone can tell us how it was marketed to the youth when they were young. It was glorified even among your friends
Oh,
in high
no
school and
question.
parties. That's the pinnacle, right, of activity.
Well, you talk about pinnacle. Let's take this pinnacle. You do a wedding, and as a judge, I've performed a number of weddings. And after the wedding's done, you have people who speak on behalf of the bride and the groom, and they stand up and they hold up a glass of champagne. And how do they glorify this alcoholic drink? Let's have a drink of alcohol, which is personification of happiness for the newly married couple.
Yeah.
It literally is a personification of the blessing over the wedding. It really is. Think of what they're doing.
It's a societal issue. It's huge. 13-year-olds, even younger, that's very concerning. In my smart recovery group, there was a young lady, bright, and on New Year's Eve, she drank a lot of alcohol. Friends were around, but they forgot to roll her on her side, so she aspirated and died.
Hmm.
And when I was in Carrier Clinic, this is a little different, but a guy showed up that was sober for 30 years, and here he was in Carrier Clinic. It's a constant reminder, and I'm constantly telling my group, we can never let our guard down. We have to be constantly vigilant. Would I like to be that person that has 2 drinks and stop? Yeah. but I'm not. And that's the key. I'm not. And what really bothered me, and this is a societal issue and requires money. When I was a carrier, Medicare would pay for detox 7 days. I opted to go for the whole 30. Well, the young kids who are on Medicaid, they would only get detox. And then they were booted out into the exact same situation. A couple were a carrier, they left and overdosed, one on cocaine, one on heroin. And this is serious, serious stuff. There's not enough. Give me one reason why kids on Medicaid shouldn't get a full benefit, including the entire 30, 90 days, sometimes people go to, and the appropriate aftercare. For us not to do that as a country is a sin. It's nothing less than a sin.
People are very, very short-sighted, and they'll take a look at what it costs to put an individual in for 30 days and then have proper aftercare. So he's constantly being monitored and worked with. And they say, my God, that's going to cost us $30,000. What they don't see is if they don't do that, the long run is a dysfunctional person who's going to cost society more like $1 million.
Bingo.
You know? And what they don't see is if you take a look at our county jails, and as you probably recall, I sat as a presiding judge of the criminal part for many years. And I will tell you, drugs and alcohol were a serious portion of almost every offender that came in. A serious cause, not I want to say cause, but there was underlying, where kids, young people, old people, had this problem, had a drug addiction, had an alcohol addiction, and did really, really foolish things. Most of the people that appeared before me were decent people. We had occasional folks that, you don't want to have a cup of coffee with, but for the most part, they were decent folks.
Yeah.
Doing very, very, very foolish things and very stupid things. And often they were drug and or alcohol fueled. Shootings at Rutgers, where one kid was trying to rip off some other kids for marijuana. Really? Marijuana? Shooting through the door. Didn't know it was on the other side of the door. It happened to be another student. Would it be better, if it was, legal and regulated, but regulated to the point where, in fact, we tax it, as Dana would probably suggest, in a manner that we can use that tax money to then work with the folks who, in fact, get addicted or have problems? We can, if we look at it as a circular problem, a circular issue, where you have the addiction, but we can treat the addiction because we're selling whatever it is that's being sold, and it's being taxed. So we have the money to treat the aftercare, if you will, for the problems that arise as a result of it. At the same time, educating. Dana, are you aware of any programs that are mandated in the high schools or elementary schools about drug and alcohol addiction and their effects?
I just want to give one interesting statistic first. And based on 2010 data in Massachusetts, alcohol problems cost the state of Massachusetts about $861 per person. $345 per person was directly paid out by the government. And in return, the state received about $11 per person in alcohol taxes.
So they spent what, close to $1,000 and got $11 back?
So the state directly paid $345,
right,
and got about $11 back in alcohol taxes.
That can picture what would happen if, in fact, alcohol paid for that entire tax, paid for that entire $345.
Well, and of course, taxes fluctuate across the states.
And in Massachusetts, you just lost 72% of the value over the years because taxes have not been increased for decades.
Yes.
But I think, you really got to do more than taxing. Taxing is a great idea to fund, certainly to fund programs and the like, but isn't there, honestly, Judge, you were just talking about the amount of people who came before you for making bad choices, either under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or to get alcohol or drugs, like people who are breaking into places to, I mean, I don't think a tax or going into, a store necessarily to purchase, certainly alcohol is legal, if you're of sufficient age. But I don't think that necessarily helps the overall mindset. You're really talking about changing a mindset, right? And getting into the mind of the youth of today, and trying to change that. And I guess that goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's somewhat glorified from when you're young as such a sophisticated thing to do, as such a fun thing to do. And I don't think playing with taxes is necessarily going to change that. I mean, am I right, Dana? I mean, don't you need to really get more into the mindset of the youth of today?
Right. I think it's a cultural shift.
Yeah.
And you see alcohol on TV, not just advertising, but TV shows, magazines, social media.
Yep.
People posting pictures of themselves drinking. So it is viewed as glamorous and the cool thing to do.
I'm reminded of movies made in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s of the soldier dying with a chest wound who was offered a cigarette, and said, to smoke as his last breath. And when you talk about glorification, think how that reflected the glorification of cigarettes. Camels. My dad was in the service, landed in Normandy about 3 weeks after the invasion. And he tells a story that Lucky Strikes, unfiltered Lucky Strikes, were circulated. They were given away free.
Yeah.
The servicemen. That's what we did. And we've now at the point where you can't advertise it and it can't have it in bars. Maybe the cultural shift that Dana's talking about is not impossible considering what we've done with cigarettes.
Yeah.
Because we approached it the same way, taxed it the same way, stopped the glorification the same way. We could keep it legal because I have to say I'm somewhat of a libertarian and believe people should have access if they want to. But the glorification of it really makes it something that kids in particular, you want a part of. They want to grow up. They want to be a part of the adult community. And
Oh,
right
sure.
now, what's the best way to do that? Well, mom and dad drink, lawyers drink, doctors drink. You watch the movies, when something's going down, what does Vin Diesel do? Takes a shot. What do they do? What do we see? What do the kids see? And, the more you think about it, the more we really do, make alcohol something special, something, you take at a toast at a wedding, something you take before you go do something difficult, something you take before you make a decision. And Jim, I think we both agree, I think we all agree that drinking doesn't exactly sharpen your mind.
Oh, of
After
course.
2 or 3 drinks, it's not like you're going to do complex, problems as well
No,
as before.
I tell people and I tell my group that my brain cells are still regenerating, and I believe that sometimes. But so many good points were made, Dana, Brad. I mean, the money that is spent advertising and lobbying for alcohol could certainly be much better well spent. And Dana, you mentioned the tremendous health costs that go into, treating people with serious health problems. Our priorities are just we in a lot of different levels. And I know, Brad, you would agree with me. Our society has really got to get its act together because right now it's not.
Well, I don't really drink much. I will, on a very rare occasion, have a scotch. But frankly, I don't drink because I have a drink, I get a headache. So it just got to the point for me physically, it just wasn't worthwhile.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, and I'm sure every one of us runs into exactly the same situation. When you go to a restaurant, when you go get something to eat, when you go to a friend's house,
Yeah.
the first thing placed on the table is what would you like to drink? And they're not talking about that iced tea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the nature of the beast. And the drinks are stupid expensive. I think my going out to dinner bills probably are 30%, 40% cheaper than when they were when I was drinking.
No question, Brad. I noticed that. In fact, when I was at my height, I was probably spending about $500 a week. I
Just
always
on
went to the
alcohol?
top shelf. I never went to the bottom shelf. But you know, when I quit drinking, my wife and I go, where'd all this money come from? We have all of this money. Another great reward. And a good friend of mine said to me once, and it's true, when you become intoxicated, the first thing to go out the window is judgment. And it is. Your judgment flies right out the window, and then everything else, whatever.
And the second
Well,
thing
I
is
mean,
filter.
that's a really interesting point, Jim. And I think that maybe, that deserves a little bit of attention. The fact that you are impaired when you're intoxicated. Uh, and I guess maybe that's the whole point. Some people are in high stress worlds where they're looking to numb that sensation, right? And they turn to something artificial. Rather than what I think really needs to happen in certain situations is a reexamination of your life to figure out how to find some joy in your life without alcohol. What is making you so stressed or so miserable? Maybe you need to get to the bottom of that because there's certainly all sorts of triggers to start a dependency on alcohol. I mean, I do think that it does run in some families, so you may be somewhat predisposed for it, but we can agree that not every predisposed person turns out to be an alcoholic, right? Just like anything, they could separate twins at birth who are both predisposed to have the BRCA gene, let's say to get breast cancer, but if you separate them, both won't always get it. And why is that? What are the environmental triggers that both of them went through? And some of them, didn't, maybe go through a high stress life or have triggers that brought it on. The other environmental things, the way they eat, the way they live. So I think that's true of alcoholism too. It can run in your family, but not every person who might be predisposed winds up with it. It is a lot of factors that surround us, not only making it attractive, not only having society, and I love the word cultural shift, but I do think we need that cultural shift, Dana. But I mean, I also think we need to examine some other issues here that are going on. What can we do? How can we move the ball forward here? I'm not really sure. I mean, it's a problem that's been around for a long time. We've made alcohol illegal in this country. It didn't really help, right? We
No,
made it
the
legal in this
bootleggers all
country.
got rich.
Yeah, we made it legal in this country. It doesn't really change. Again, I think I go back to the same thing. It's a mindset. And I do think we need some maybe it's the entertainment world. Maybe that's the plan, right? If the entertainment world didn't depict it as much, if you had more film or TV shows that showed carried through maybe a main character, what it really looks like to be in the criminal justice system, right? Like to be have your senses dulled and not be you know looking at it. I mean, right, with clarity.
Yeah,
I think it starts,
go ahead, Dana.
I was going to say, I think it starts with just awareness by the public, just education that what these harms are and
Yeah.
how serious they can be. I think, DUI is one of the major harms that's stressed. People know not to drink and drive. But aside from that, there's a whole host of other harms that I think the public just generally isn't aware of.
Right.
Can you speak on that a little bit?
Everybody knows you shouldn't drink and drive. The problem is, I think Jim pointed out, you start drinking, your good common sense goes out the window. You drink more, you have no common sense, and the next thing you know, you're in a car trying to drive home because, hey, I'm all right. I know where the steering wheel is. I know where the brake pedal is. I've driven that 100,000 times before. I'll be fine. I'll just close one eye so I only see one road as opposed to two. You're laughing.
That resonates with me,
I'm not
Brad.
laughing. It really even awareness. It needs to be something a little bit more, I think.
Yeah.
And I like the statement cultural shift because, and I keep thinking about lawyers. I grew up with them, so to speak. All of us did here, actually. We're all lawyers in a sense. So, and although Dana, I promise not to tell anybody else you're a lawyer.
You just did.
I'm sorry. But the reality is, even that, and especially as a young lawyer, what do we do at socials? You know, they're having, in my recollection, young lawyers have a brouhaha. They go to one of the local pubs, and that's what they do. That's their gathering. That's where they meet. You
Yeah.
know, do
Yeah.
they meet? Do they have a meet on a tennis court? You know, or if the older guys, do they have meet on a pickleball court somewhere? Do they have a sporting event where we all get
Yeah.
together? It could be,
Maybe.
Yeah.
no.
Well, I tell people, and I've
Or a
say it real
smoothie bar. That's
A
where
frequently,
we should
smoothie
go.
bar,
Smoothie bars.
what?
a coffee shop.
Coffee shop. Have that,
Coffee
have them
shop.
serve that at the bar meetings.
Yeah,
Um,
you know, I will tell you something. There's a bar meeting coming up, and I have not been to a bar executive meeting in quite some time. I may go, and I may raise this issue.
yeah,
And I might say maybe we ought to stop, you know, including for a number of reasons, including alcohol in our county bar fee, if you want to go, not just because it's a bad idea, but because maybe some of us don't want to pay for your drinking.
right.
Maybe I don't want to pay $70 to show up when $20 of it is going to be so somebody else can get drunk, get in an accident, and hurt themselves or somebody else.
I'm very disturbed by the stigma, to the point where I posted it on Facebook that, look, I'm an alcoholic. I'm sick of the stigma. I wanted to go. And the responses were overwhelmingly positive.
Mhm.
Jim, it took a lot to say that. Hopefully, this will help other people. And you know what? It's true. My lawyer for the DWI said to me, Jim, people that uh, know you, they're not going to judge you. And the few who do, fuck them. That's exactly what he said.
Your lawyer spoke French, huh?
Yeah, he was fluent in French, as a matter of fact. That's
Well,
my piece. I'm done until there's some follow-up.
well, I agree that, what you're saying, what both of you are really saying, but I still think you got to do something more. I mean, what about Dana? I have a friend, a very good friend, who didn't AA like didn't work for him. The usual courses of treatment didn't work for him. He got into transcendental meditation. And meditation truly was saved his life. I mean, was his path. He's gone his entire life since that point, where I think it was his early 20s when he finally kind of crashed and said he hit bottom really in his life. He had started drinking at a very young age, a kid, really, just a
Yeah,
kid.
yeah,
And it got to the point where his life just kind of collapsed around him, which is pretty common for alcoholics. Eventually, it starts, it starts up here, and then it starts slowly, you start losing things in your life. And last of all, that you lose everything. Oftentimes even their family walks away, and he hits bottom and could not get sober using all the traditional methods. And meditation, though, truly did work for him. He's gone his whole life since then, never taking a drink, meditates every day. Every time he gets into a stressful situation, I mean, in addition to the daily, if he's someplace where he feels stressed out and it's getting to
Calm
him,
down.
he'll literally go. I was with him somewhere once, and he just like, I have to go. I'll be back.
yeah,
Disappeared for 20 minutes, came back, and he had meditated.
yeah.
What about teaching meditation from grammar school?
Well,
Like,
I think
does
it's a
that
good
help?
idea. Yeah, and after every meeting I have, we end with meditation. I think I see a lot of benefits to that. Um, yeah,
Self-awareness, I mean, being one of them, right? Self-awareness, because I think you need some of that from a young age to be able to navigate your way past the temptations, your friends, because it's a lot harder to go, no, thank you, right? To be the odd person. It's much harder to do that.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be very self-aware from a young age that these are problems. This is the kind of stuff that can happen. And maybe that's a meaningful program we could try to implement, meditation from young.
I don't do much in the treatment space, but I do know that we often see substance use disorders co-occurring with mental health disorders. So,
Absolutely.
and stress being one of them, and meditation being a great way to kind of curb your symptoms or as a treatment. I'm not really familiar with treatment protocols per se, but I think it's, of course, could be a great idea. Just different outlets than substances to alleviate your stress or mental health symptoms.
Different
Yeah,
outlets.
and
Hey, Jim, you talked about the stigma
yeah,
of having been an alcoholic.
yeah,
Maybe that's something that needs to be addressed. Maybe there shouldn't be a stigma on it. Maybe that's something we have to take a step back and say, you know what? Somebody broke their leg. They fixed it.
right.
Somebody has a mental health issue. They fixed it.
And that's another one we got to work on.
Why should we as society believe there's a stigma to having stopped drinking? Because the reality is, Jim, what you said is very true. Those people who know you, those people who understand are going to congratulate you and say, that's awesome. So where's the stigma in that? But yet we have the stigma.
And it's unwarranted. It's completely unwarranted. You're absolutely right, Brad. Somebody mentioned about entertainers and stuff. Well, a lot of them are really coming out and being very open about their substance abuse issues, alcohol, cocaine, whatever. And I like
But
that.
I'm thinking more towards movies, movies, television shows where they have characters
Right.
who I think Judge, you had said earlier, Vin Diesel takes a drink before he, has to go into a hard situation where they, it's part of the story.
Right. But I've seen television shows where one of the main characters is an alcoholic and is dealing with it. So there's a shift, but we certainly need a lot more. And the entertainment industry and the athletes can do a hell of a lot to moving that ball forward.
I think there's two distinct different issues. And I think that Tony Ann, you're absolutely right. And it's one of the things we spoke about earlier, and that is having making alcohol a positive thing in movies. Maybe that should be removed. Maybe, you shouldn't have the main actor taking a shot, or just like we don't have the dying soldier with a chest wound having a cigarette now. I don't think you see that in movies any longer. I don't think. I haven't, and goodness knows I watch enough war movies and documentaries. I'm trying to make myself think smart by saying documentaries, but that's just garbage war movies. We don't see that. We still see them taking shots, and not mixed drinks. A man's drink, so to speak. Trying to be more macho, trying to be tougher. We see that.
Scotch neat. Scotch
That's
neat.
one issue. But the second issue that I addressed specifically to Jim was the stigma issue. And I think I give you credit for having the courage to come forward believing that, breaking the chain of alcoholism there should be a stigma. It shouldn't be. It should be a goddamn
I
gold
agree
star.
with you. Well, I agree with you. And the more people that become open and honest about it, you just minimize the stigma and hopefully eventually eliminate it.
I don't, and that maybe somebody can help me, and because I sit here and I'm going to plead ignorance. Why is it a stigma? Is it because you couldn't handle alcohol? Really? I mean, is that what it is?
I think it's probably cultural because it's so cool. Everyone's doing it and you can't.
Yeah.
You can't participate.
My maternal
Wow,
grandparents are from Ireland. I've been there 3 times. Holy jeez. I ended up in Dublin the last night. We stayed in a hotel. And I was with my wife and my stepson. My stepson went out on a Saturday night. When I woke up on Sunday morning, the number of kegs along the street blew my mind. Totally blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. So in a cultural sense, Irish? Oh yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a stereotype, but I think there's a reason. There's always a truth behind it that is called the Irish virus. I've seen it in my family. It's like a frickin' virus. Treat it like that.
So how would you propose, what educational source, what information can be shared that would get people to at least take a half a step back and go, you know what? Somebody that doesn't drink doesn't mean they're not part of the crowd. Doesn't mean they can't join us. Doesn't
Right,
mean they're not part of the family still, you
right,
know.
right.
What do you need to do to push folks over to that side of reality? You know,
I
when you
don't know. I mean,
I
you know
mean, is
what
that a
though? Give
question,
you
Brad?
well, it's
I
it's
don't know
rhetorical in a
either.
sense. Because I don't know the answer. Yeah.
No, no, no. Except that the more and more people open up,
Hmm.
eventually I think the stigma will be eliminated. And there's other issues too that have come about. There's now something called the CDC calls it cannabis use disorder. How about that one? So there's a lot of
Oh
lot
no, I think
lot
James,
of stuff is
you see, we would just call those in the old days stoners, which is another example, if you will, of acceptance of use of drugs. And hey, it's okay. He's just a quote unquote stoner. That's all right.
right,
That was nature,
right.
right? When in fact, instead of going to class, instead of being functional, instead of doing that which his parents are paying for it so he can get an education, he's hanging out and getting high,
Yep,
right?
yep.
I mean, I think I got, and Dana, you can correct me. I know you're really into policy, and that's your focus. Uh, but I think there needs to be some policy, uh, because here's what's happening. I think the youth of today have it glorified from young, and they're attracted to the drinking. I think as you age, the drinking becomes, and it could be anything, any drug of choice, right? It can, and we're talking about alcoholism, but it can be pot, or
Anyone. Mhm.
it could be
Mhm.
any form of drug. It could be anything. The idea, typically, as you age, is that you need some crutch. You need something to help you forget, something to numb, again, loneliness, disappointment, just misery, perhaps in a career or with a partner that you might be with. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons that people rely upon some external source, right? And I think at the end of the day, because alcoholism or having drugs or alcohol, there's an intentionalness about it that none of us talked about, right? You are choosing to do that at the end of the day, right? No one's pushing you into it. That's a choice you're making among your choices that are available to you to deal with what might be a problem. You're making a conscious choice to do that because maybe it
Every
fits in or
day.
it feels the best. You're making that choice. So the same way you've made a choice to get yourself into it, it's not quite as easy to make a choice to get yourself out of it, because then there becomes the physicality of what's happened to your body, and getting off of it. Your body doesn't always want to let go of it quite as easily
Right.
um as maybe your mind might, right? So I think there needs some policy that's geared towards this, like helping people make better choices from young. It's not the option, because it can cause you problems. You can kill other people, you can hurt yourself significantly, you can hurt your body, you can cause diseases later on in life to yourself. And then for older people, like, this is not a viable stress technique. Right? It's not a viable stress technique. Having alcohol as your release from stress or to fix your problems will only exacerbate your problems, right? And I think that needs to be a message we're getting out there. Policy wise, what can we do, Dana?
I I think that while yes, using alcohol is a choice that you make, I think that the nature of it being so ingrained in our culture blurs the line a little bit, that like this is what you're supposed to do. So is it as conscious as we think it is? I would say probably not. I think it's probably subconscious, that like this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to go out to dinner. I'm supposed to have a drink. I'm
Yeah.
supposed to have a glass of red wine with my steak. But in terms of policy, you have to meet people where they are. Like, you can't make alcohol illegal tomorrow. That would be a lot of backlash, right?
Well,
And it won't help.
yeah, it won't help.
We can
Prohibition.
we can start with small things, like maybe your municipality allows, or your state allows, local ordinances to limit the number of signs on liquor stores that advertise alcohol, right? So taking that advertisement from the front of the store and putting it inside so people walking past can't see it. So I think small changes that you can lessen the visibility of alcohol really goes a long way. And it's a slow process, but you have to meet people where they are.
I think
Dana, I
that
have a question for you. With my kids, they had the DARE program and they looked at it like a joke. They literally looked at it as a joke.
Right.
What's going on in the schools today? And I just wanted to mention municipalities. We're fortunate here in Woodbridge that we have a behavioral and addicted services right here in the township. And, they have a lot of good people, all of them former addicts. So we're fortunate in terms of that. But getting back to what is happening with our school kids today.
I can't really speak to programs in the school. I think it's often very dependent on the state and then the school district. I mean, I had DARE as well. And I'm sure we touched on alcohol, but that today, what I remember is drugs like heroin, cocaine, those being talked about heavily. But
Oxy.
alcohol is
Yeah.
the most popular drug that's used.
Yeah.
Members of our legislature use alcohol, our police officers, the people that are teaching DARE, teachers, lawyers, like we said, everyone uses alcohol.
I
Which
think therein lies a significant part of the problem when those who we admire, policemen, legislators, governors, are in fact drinkers, which is not, again, I'm not opposed to making alcohol available, but when we see that as part of the culture, it becomes not just acceptable, but almost expected. I'm not going to cast stones at anyone, but I think we all know folks in our profession and other professions who are functional alcoholics, who are able to function, go to work, make decisions, perhaps usually okay, sometimes questionable, but function. And some, in fact, who would go to work all day sober, and then in the evening they would start drinking. We see it, we know it exists, and that's what young folks see.
Yeah.
There's no indication that I have that there's any underlying feeling in this country that maybe we need to take a half a step back and not glorify, encourage, accept, condone the use of alcohol. When Dana was talking about what she remembers, or the illegal drugs, my recollection is, yeah, that's that, it's okay to get so drunk you can't see straight and drive into a telephone pole. The drinking's okay. The telephone pole, is not okay, but the drinking's all right. But you can't, use other drugs because we've decided that they're illegal. We are in a very unusual situation, where society's decided some drugs are illegal per se, and some drugs, alcohol, not illegal, marijuana, not illegal. And I think we have to take a half a step back and take some real hard looks at how we're going to react to the ramifications that are occurring now and will continue to occur into the future with the use, by the way, not just of alcohol, but as we've touched on it, the legal marijuana now. I don't know what it means or how it's going to impact on folks who get, because I don't want to use the word quality, but the amount of THC, the amount of inebriant or intoxicant in the marijuana that is for sale in a dispensary is significantly different and significantly higher than that which was on the street, I think, back in the 60s and 70s and up until the cultivation stages that we're now dealing with. I don't know how it's going to affect folks. You know, they're going to get in a car and think they're in a spacecraft, then on the way to the moon. I just don't know.
Yeah.
But how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to educate that? And we can't do it the same way we do it with alcohol because
You
it's
know,
been an utter failure.
I don't have the answer to that either, Brad, but it's going to take a huge societal commitment and hard work. How's that going to happen now? I don't have a clue. You look at what's happened in Washington right now, and it's like, how are we ever going to get anything done? So, yeah, do I have the answer? No. I hope collectively, the rational thinking people of the world can kind of get to some practical proposals.
I don't know whether rational thinking is a consistent thought pattern in those folks who make decisions.
Yep, agreed.
Well, I want to thank everybody. I really brought us together because I think this is an important discussion to have, right? And I wanted to start the ball rolling just to discuss these issues. And certainly we don't have any consensus and we really don't have any answers. I'm not even sure we came up with some very good suggestions, but I mean, I think we at least opened the door for discussion and some focus. I hope that's true. I think we could go on and on for days and really not have any better clarity than we have right here. Beyond the, you know, something I think needs to be done. And for those of you who are struggling and want help, you know, there's help out there to have. There are success stories. There are people who get past it and live a happy and full life. And maybe every day, you know, it always remains in the back of your head. I get that, but there's a way out. You know, you don't have to keep spiraling if you want it. There is help. So I encourage you to seek help out. And if one thing doesn't work for you, like with my friend, you know, if AA doesn't work for you, maybe meditation will, or maybe there's another type like the program Jim
Yeah,
is talking about. Maybe there's another program that will work for you. Keep searching until you find it.
right.
Um,
Absolutely. And it's out there.
And I want to thank my
Definitely.
panel for joining me today to discuss what is a heavy topic.